just so we can get a crack-a-lackin' place. Happy Monday. I hope you had a nice weekend. It was a good weekend. It went really, really fast. Lots of work and lots of sitting. We did a wrestling tournament this weekend, and I'm gonna take yeah, a little rough. But it was a tough tournament. But anyway, just to put it into perspective, the timeliness of it. I worked Friday night from 6 to midnight, and then we had to be back on the road. It was just in Omaha, but back on the road by 6:30 in the morning. Um, we sat in the Ralston Arena for 7.5 hours on Saturday for two matches because there were buys mixed in. He was just in a bad part of the bracket. And then I went to work Saturday night from 6 to midnight, had to be back on the road at 6:20. Sunday morning for three matches in 5.5 hours. So, yikes, it was a lot of sitting around and tiredness. So I went to bed about 8:30 last night, and I think I'm kind of caught up. So hopefully, anyway. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last time, and we were talking about cotton. I think did we together do a Morse code thing where you had to decode a message for me? So we get how Morse code worked. And does anybody happen to remember, trivia-wise, who was the real inventor of Morse code? Everyone would love you to believe it was Samuel Morse, and the idea was his, but he didn't refine it, I guess, to the point where it was actually usable. It was Alfred Vail. Remember that story? So, yeah, nobody else remembers that anyway. But anyway, today we're moving in the direction of cotton, and I think we even kind of got started with it, but we'll reverse just a little bit to that section. And then some rebellion and hopefully some compromise to finish up the chapter. And when we're finished with whatever we get finished with today, your assignment is to take the Chapter 11 test. You can take it outside of class. We're not going to have time to do it in class today. Most of it's pretty easy. There is one short answer question that you do need to put a little bit of extra effort into just because it is short answer. By short answer, a sentence or a phrase isn't going to do it for you. It's just a waste of my time because you can't answer that question in a sentence or a phrase because there's, I think, two questions in it. So take your time and give me a reasonably decent, thoughtful answer, and you should be able to get full credit on that. So have that done. Hopefully today, maybe during WIN, it'll only take it's only like 15 questions long, so it'll only take you minutes. But you can use your resources, you just can't use each other. So don't be copying off of McKenna again.
Hey.
Well, maybe not. Which would reflect why your grades are the way they are. You've been copying off of McKenna.
Yeah, exactly. Why didn't you guys say yours?
Well, I'm not going to say which one because that would be incriminating, be mean. And I'm not mean to students. Okay, just a little. So that's the plan, Rubber Band. It's not in Otis yet, but I did also, just in case you missed a day or you're confusical about something, the full set of Chapter 11 notes is in Google Classroom as of this morning, so you can go back and look at that if you need to. There's also videos of every lesson for Chapter 11, including today's, that will be posted in Google Classroom. So I guess if you really need to, if you've missed school, use the notes. If you need to go back and watch the videos or fast forward through parts of the videos follow the notes just like class does. So if you're just confused about a part of class, fast forward yourself in the video till you see the slide that you need to know information about, and then you'll hear me yapping about it. So super stupid easy. Take care of whatever business needs taken care of. That is your first grade for the quarter, so make sure you do a goodly job on it. And we don't have a long time in the quarter before we hit parent-teacher conferences, like February 5th or something like that, somewhere in that range already. So about a month, less than a month, we have conferences, and at that point you'll have like 3 or 4 grades is all. So we began talking briefly about cotton, and I think I showed you an example, no, of a cotton boll?
Yeah.
How come some of you remember and some of you don't? Anyway, this cotton came out of a field in southern Texas where my parents lived, and it's kind of getting beat up and pretty fragile because I've been using it for many, many years. But this is what a cotton boll looks like, B-O-L-L. So corn is on a cob. cotton is a boll. So you look at a field and it's got bazillions of these little things, and who's picking the cotton? Slaves. This is super heavy um, workload because you got to walk through a field and the billions of these little cotton bolls you have to walk through, and every one of them pick the cotton off of it, and this is what's left over. And I think I showed you the image of it, and on this plant, I can't get the right angle. That looks like a cat claw, and it is actually really kind of sharp and stickery. So can you imagine? And if I already said this, too bad. But you imagine walking through a field picking millions of these in a day, thousands, I don't know, and you take the cotton boll and stick it in a canvas bag right next to you. So you're dragging it could be a 40-pound bag of cotton behind you by the end of the day. If you pick thousands of these, what are these little sharp pointy things going to do to your fingers? Can you imagine sticking one of those under your fingernail or into your cuticle? The cuticle's where your fingernail attaches to the skin. Ow! But they probably had a lot tougher hands than what I do. But the real problem is, just in this one cotton boll right here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 seeds, and they don't come out. So if I didn't, I'll pass this around so that you can just squeeze it and feel, oh my gosh, there are a lot of seeds. You can't see them. I guess you can if you hold it up to a bright light. But that one piece of cotton has a lot of seed. Now, the cotton seed is really a pain in the neck because 1, 2, 3. There's 3 in this, 4 in this chunk. And if I decide to take one out, here's an easy one. Even if I do pull it out, it's still covered in cotton fuzz. And I want as little cotton fuzz as I can get on that seed, because the more fuzz that's on it, the less cotton I harvest. And all those seeds, you're going to lose a lot of cotton. So prior to this machine that does it, and you can see we've got men in this picture that are dumping cotton into one side and a guy cranking it. And what happens ultimately is these are like little wooden fingers that comb through the cotton, pulling the seeds out and straightening the fibers. So prior to the cotton gin, you'd have a man or a woman sitting with a pile of cotton next to them, and they take a chunk of cotton and set it on top of, you have 2 cards. They're wooden blocks with little teeny tiny wiry teeth, and they just comb it like you comb McKenna's hair until it's nice and straight. And once it's nice and straight, the seeds begin to fall out. So we now have a machine that does the work of 50 men. And I know we talked about this last week, but if we have a machine that does the work of 50 slaves, that should mean that we need to reduce the number of slaves on southern plantations. But the opposite is going to be true. If a machine replaces the need for 50 slaves, how in the wide world of sports does it make sense that we're going to increase the need for slaves? What does that have to do with it? Kate says because they could harvest more. So what? Because they can have more fields and they can grow more cotton, so they're going to need more slaves. So it's taken one of the labor-intensive processes out. You know, and I've told you multiple times before that George Washington called slavery a necessary evil. He didn't like it, but he had to have it because he needed those men to pick his cotton. Actually, George Washington was an interesting farmer. He was super smart, and he was having trouble getting cotton buyers to give him a goodly amount for the cotton that he was growing. So one year, George Washington completely quit growing cotton and switched to wheat. And it screwed with the cotton growers because now they didn't have all of George Washington's cotton to deal with, so it changed the prices. So G-Dub was a pretty bright guy when it came to that, and wheat's price, at least at that time, always remained fairly steady. So it probably wasn't as valuable as cotton, but does wheat require as much labor? No, not necessarily. So the cotton gin is a pretty simple machine. This is a short video of it actually working. It's not at all entertaining or exciting, but they took a cotton gin and they put it like a glass case around it so you can see how it works. I'll play it briefly, and if you watch, you can see it spitting the seeds into a bucket kind of, or a tub. What do you think they did with the seeds after they removed them from the cotton? plant them next year. We can't do that with corn seeds today, so Farmer Fred that's growing corn can't just open up the bin and scoop his planter full because most of the seeds that we grow today are hybrid seeds, which means they're bred for specific qualities and characteristics, which also means that most of the time they are, I don't know if sterile is the right word, but they're not able to reproduce. So if you took a corn seed from the grain bin and planted it, it might grow, but if it grows, it's not going to make a 12-inch long cob of corn. It's going to be all janky and it might have just a few kernels on it. It doesn't work very well. So farmers, when they plant, have to buy their seeds, even though they have bins full of corn seeds. It's different than what you purchase. So seed is very, very expensive. It's an old school cotton gin. And you can see they're putting the fibers through and the little seeds are dropping off of it. And they're pretty clean. That one doesn't appear to be working very well. And this is more like the one that I showed you in the picture before, except it has a plastic cover instead of wood. That lady's really cranky. That was funny. Come on. Once in a while you can see a seed falling out. It's kind of like Build-A-Bear Workshop, right? Where they, not well, except not really. This is a modern cotton picker. Okay, so later on, when we get rid of slavery, all of the slave owners in the South, the cotton growers in the South, are like, oh my gosh, how are we going to grow our cotton? We don't have slaves. Well, Americans are really good at coming up with solutions to problems. So when we take away slaves that pick all the cotton, we've got to come up with mechanized ways to do it. So we do. You know, it's kind of like if there were huge shortages of gasoline and the price of gas went to $9 a gallon, what do you think car manufacturers would do to the efficiency of our cars? Do you think it's possible to develop engines that burn gasoline that can get 60 or 70 or 80 miles per gallon instead of the 20 that we're used to? Yeah, especially if we're forced to do it. Right now, gas is more expensive than it was a year ago, so when people are shopping for cars, they're probably looking for cars that get a little bit better gas mileage. When gas is $1.50 a gallon, you can drive a truck or a Suburban that uses lots of gasoline because gas is cheap. But if gas is, you say in some places in California, between $5 and $7 a gallon, if gas is $7 a gallon, are you going to drive a Suburban that gets 12 miles per gallon? Not unless you have to. You're going to drive a Toyota Prius or something. So economic necessity is what drives us to invent new technology. So yeah, this is top of the line, best of the best. This cotton picker would bale the cotton. So all of those little yellow things right there are pretty much vacuums. So as they're driving through the field, it just sucks the cotton right off of the plant. Somehow cleans it, somehow takes it through the process of removing the seed. So there's a cotton gin built into the combine itself. That machine costs about $600,000. So cotton growers, whoever the guy is that owned the field where this bag full of cotton came from, he probably has a nice fancy machine like that to do the work for him. But it takes less time and less energy to harvest the cotton, but it's expensive. So we're slaves. So there's trade-offs. If we want that brand new technology to get 60 or 80 miles per gallon, if we want an electric car, that technology is new. And what do we know about all technology when it's brand new? It's always expensive. And then over time, as we figure it out and get better at it, it usually becomes cheaper. So 20 years ago, we couldn't afford to put computers on the desks of all of the students. But now, the Chromebook on your desk, the school probably gets a deal because we buy so many of them. But if you go to the store to buy that Chromebook, a really nice, well-equipped Chromebook you can get for like $150. I think. I haven't bought one for a while. So those are probably even cheaper than that because, well, they don't have all of the bells and whistles, and the school bought like a bazillion of them, so HP probably gave us a deal on them. So the technology gets cheaper. Or do any of you still have a television in your house that's one of those great big heavy suckers instead of the skinny ones that you mount on your wall? Yeah, when we first started with those skinny ones that you mount on your wall, they were super crazy expensive. Now they're not. They're still expensive. All technology is expensive, but they're relatively cheap. So, or when the first cell phone came out, it did almost nothing, and it took a bag the size of a shoebox to carry it around, and it didn't do anything that this did. And it costs about the same as your modern cell phone that is a computer. Does this cell phone have pretty much the same computing power that your Chromebook does? The only reason it's necessary to have Chromebooks is because this is so small. It's not convenient for everything we want to do. Right? You can watch movies on your 6-inch iPhone screen, but is it as good as watching movies on your 70-inch television? No, and the sound stinks too. So we have to have something a little bigger and a little nicer. So this it looks like Mrs. Toll wrote this slide. So it looks like a green bug pooping out marshmallows. This video is longer than what I want to show, so I will fast forward through parts of it. But this is how a modern cotton picker works. And the music is kind of like. So anyway, you watch it in slow motion. It's getting ready to take off. Very, very mechanized. It's rolling along. Drops a cotton bale. Okay, obviously then a tractor's got to come by later and pick that up. But look how fast it's going through that field. And now imagine the amount of time that it would take enslaved people to walk through a field, picking each of those little white cotton bolls by hand. Yikes. That's a lot of time. So this thing like really, really fast. My wife couldn't drive it because she'd go too fast and scare the cotton over. It's sort of like when she mows the lawn. Our lawnmower will go, the handbook says it'll go 11 miles per hour, but you shouldn't mow at 11 miles per hour because it can't cut that fast. My wife, it's full speed, and she's like, I mowed today, and I'm like, I can't tell because all you did is scare the grass to fall over, and then the next day it stands back. I'm like, just slow down and cut it nice, and then you don't have to mow as often. But anyway, just to give you some idea of cotton statistics, a bale, an average size bale of cotton, 54 inches by 20 inches by 33 inches. So someone who's, 54 inches would be 4 foot 6 inches tall, right? Is anybody 4 foot 6, or are y'all taller than that? Who? You're taller than that? Well, that's good. You're probably all like 5 or 5'1" at the minimum. So 4 foot 6 tall. So that's what, here-ish, maybe? That's the height of a cotton bale. Average weight between 400 and 500 pounds. Think about how light cotton is. There's no weight to it. So big round cotton bales that you see coming out of that baler today, about 5,000 pounds. So it squishes it together much, much tighter. It's more efficient. It's easier to haul. What do you get out of one bale of cotton? This is kind of fun. 215, any one of these, not all of them, 215 pairs of jeans, bed sheets, men's shorts, 690 bath towels, 765 dress shirts, 1,200 t-shirts, pillowcases, boxer shorts, men's briefs, 3,000 diapers, cloth diapers. None of you probably used cloth diapers when you were a baby because disposable's just a lot easier. But they're horrible for the environment. So, big cotton diapers. Can you imagine washing the poo out of every diaper? That's what my mom had to do. Gross. Fortunately, I didn't poop when I was a baby, so my mom never had to clean any of that. I just peed. Pee's easy. Throw it in the washer. Who cares? Anyway, socks, 21,000 women's handkerchiefs. Or we could make, this one would be more fun, $313,600 $100 bills out of a bale of cotton. Yeah, that's a lot of money. So, and that's a 480 pound bale. That's not the modern one that we're talking about. That's old school square bale of cotton. What do they look like? Well, I guess I got a slide before that. If we look at the historic price of cotton, between 1800 and 1860, before the cotton gin, 10 to 37 cents a pound. And a pound of cotton is quite a bit of cotton. I don't know, there's probably half a pound of cotton in this bag. In 2018, $3 to $7.40, depending on the harvest. If we have a huge harvest, the number is lower. If we have a smaller harvest, the number is going to be higher. Look what happens to the price in 1863 to 1864. In just that short amount of time, it goes from 10 cents to $1.29. If you're a cotton grower, what do you want to do? Grow more cotton, because you're going to get stinking rich doing it. Now, part of the reason for this is 1863 and 1864 is the middle of the American Civil War, so nobody's growing as much of anything as what they should be growing. But $25 to $30. So just imagine the change in value. What, that 10 cents to $1.29? That's a $1.19 more for a pound of cotton. That'd be like taking corn. Do I have any farmers in here? I think corn is like $5 a bushel right now, maybe a little bit more than that. But that would be like taking corn 10 times its value and saying corn is worth $50 a bushel. Our corn farmers around here would be like, woohoo! Because that's a lot of money. But when we see the increase in the value of goods or increase in the value of a product that goes up 10 times in a short period of time, what happens to inflation? Inflation is the increase in the value of goods and a decrease in the value of our money. If cotton's now worth 10 times what it was a few years earlier, how much can we buy with the money that we have? So if cotton's worth 10 times as much, then the cloth that you need to buy to make your shirt is also 10 times more expensive. So our money's worth less. If you're an oil driller right now, are you upset with the price of oil? No, because that's how you make your money, is sucking oil out of the ground. So to oil drillers, they're happy that gas is expensive. Woohoo! Does that mean that Taylor Quick Pick is making more money off of the gas that they're selling? Nope, because they're paying more for it too. They don't make that much per gallon, and I don't know how much any of the gas stations make per gallon, but it's minuscule. In fact, most gas stations make the majority of their money, because when you stop and fill up your tank with gas, you go in and buy a soda or a donut or a coffee, and that's where they make their money. So I don't know if that's true because I don't own a gas station, but I've certainly heard that before. By 1890, prices dropped as low as 6 cents a pound. Oh my gosh. Because no slaves were growing it, and we had some issues. Square bale of cotton. See the values changing, 3.5 times the price before. By 1860, New York City cotton business was $200 million with the South. Nearly $6.1 billion worth of cotton grown in America today. So still a major important crop to us, but we had major issues because of the end of slavery. So demand fuels production. The more cotton that we need, the more cotton that we need to grow. In 1800, we grew 156,000 bales of cotton. In 1860, 4 million bales of cotton. So if we have a machine that replaces the need of 50 men, the cotton gin, because it makes growing cotton more efficient and harvesting cotton more efficient, if we're going to go from growing 156,000 bales of cotton to 4 million bales of cotton, has nothing to do with the cotton gin, but now we have to add more humans to the process of growing it. So the need for slavery is going to increase dramatically. 1790, there were 700,000 slaves. By 1860, there were 4 million slaves. So that whole in the beginning, when the Constitutional Convention got together in Philadelphia to write or rewrite the Constitution from the Articles of Confederation, and they said, we won't mess with the issue of slavery for at least 20 years, the issue wasn't as big of an issue as it is by 1860. So those people who are called abolitionists, abolitionist root word is abolish. Abolish means to get rid of or do away with. Yeah, they're growing in number because they're seeing the number of slaves is getting bigger and bigger. The bigger the problem is, the easier it is for us to see. And since the problem has multiplied times 5, it's pretty easy to see. 75% of British cotton came from America. Many Northerners were involved in the illegal cotton trade. We don't need to talk about most of this. And cotton fueled the Confederate War. Most of the world's cotton supply came from the southern states of America. So when the South needed money to fight the war, they demanded or depended on the sale of cotton to do it. If you're the North and you want to make life difficult for the South, what do you cut off? Cotton trade. I'll give you an example. Russia. Kind of scary, powerful country. Economically not very stable, not very powerful. Russia makes most of its money. The Russian government pays its bills and grows its military using oil money. So there's lots of oil in Russia. But in Russia, the state or the government owns all the oil. So their whole federal budget isn't on bringing taxes in from the people. It's on selling oil that the government owns. Their budget is set on selling oil at $80 a barrel. About 2 years ago, the price of oil hit a negative, which means oil companies were paying people to take the oil because they couldn't stop pumping it. If they stop pumping it, then the wells have issues. I can't explain it. I'm not a geologist or an oil driller. So Russia was hurting. Now that the price of oil has gone up, and we're seeing that when we pay for gas at the pumps, the Russians are happy. So as we're sitting around whining about, oh my gosh, gas is $3.09, there are some people that are super happy that the price of gas is $3.09 because that means the price of oil has gone up. The same thing was true with the cotton trade. If we want to harm Russia without going to war with them, we take away their ability to sell oil. Or we force the price of oil down to the point where it's so low they can't pay their bills. How can we force the price down? Stop using it, which is really hard for us, or find our own. Does it exist within the United States? Yes. Unfortunately, at least I think, we don't like drilling for it because it can cause some ecological problems. So the whole world is kind of set together economically with the price of commodities like cotton or oil or corn. This is a cotton bale from the 1800s or a cotton bale from today. Is there any real major difference? Nope, pretty much looks the same. This maybe is a little fresher and whiter and cleaner than this, but really you can't tell much difference. Check this out. It's one of my favorite pictures that we look at in all of history. That's a barge on the Mississippi River loaded with cotton. If each of those cotton bales weighs 500 pounds, oh my gosh, it's heavy. I've never taken the time to count how many bales were in each row, but we've 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, at least 9 levels of bales of cotton. That boat is really, really heavy. What if it flips over? The more weight you put on the top of a ship, the more top heavy it gets, the easier it is for it to flip. So there's a lot of money invested in this cotton barge on the Mississippi River. That's crazy to think about. Can't imagine that. Even loading and unloading it, the amount of work that would go into that. All right. So the question always comes up, if we have all these slave issues and there's 4 million slaves in the South, there aren't even necessarily 4 million slave masters in the South. Some of these plantations own multiple humans. Why don't we see more of these slaves try to rebel? It almost never works out. And we've talked about before that usually the form of rebellion that they took was, breaking equipment or maybe setting a field on fire or something to economically hurt their master. But you also have to take into consideration that unless you have a really, really bad master, you could be sold to a worse master. Life isn't always better somewhere else. What's that saying? Life isn't always greener on the other side of the fence. Grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Have you heard that before? It's kind of like when you go play a basketball game at Elkhorn Ridge or one of those new Bennington Middle School, one of those new shiny schools, and you walk in and you're like, wow, this is nice. It still has the new car smell, the new paint smell. Well, does that necessarily mean it's a better school? Not necessarily. You know, schools, what makes them good schools is not the building that you're in, it's the teachers that you've got and the friends that you've got, the peers, the support that you get. And if you feel you don't have that, maybe you are better off someplace else. But that's the problem that we've got is we always think that life is better somewhere else. And then the thing is, if you talk to people that go to one of those schools, I bet you they have the same complaints about school that you do. The lunch is horrible. Math is boring. Why, it's like, I love math. Mr. Zurich is my boy. Really? Good. I'm glad you said that. I'm not going to tell him you said that, but it is recorded and it's forever. Everybody's going to know you said that. So this guy, Nat Turner, he's a slave and he starts a fairly successful slave rebellion. But listen to this. In order to start a slave rebellion, you can't really be normal. So the history books don't tell us the whole story of the Nat Turner Rebellion. It just said he looked for signs and he rebelled. Okay, well, here's the story. He was born in October of 1800. He's deeply religious. He considers himself a prophet. Do you remember Prophet, what that word means? What? Maybe he can talk to God, or at the very least, can foresee the future. Someone who has a prophecy. By the way, if I was a prophet and I could tell your future, do you want to know? That's a weird question, isn't it? I mean, part of life is not knowing what's going to happen to us every day. And you know, if someone told you, well, I can tell you that you're going to die on February 5th, 2063, do you really want to know the day you're going to die? I don't think I do. I could kill over dead from a stroke tomorrow. I hope not. I kind of like living. But I could. Or I could live another 35 years. I don't know. Maybe more. I doubt, because look at me. But anyway, I'm going to try to live as long as I can. So I don't know. I don't want any prophets telling me what's going on. But anyway, 1821. So he's 21 years old. He runs away from an overseer. He escapes. Then he comes back. Nat Turner was a free man when he was 21 years old, but he returned because he had a vision. So he goes back to his master and he's like, hey man, I'm sorry that I escaped. And he just goes back to work. By 1822, that master died. He wasn't a bad master, I guess you would say. He didn't beat him, didn't whip him, fed him well enough, and his other slaves. And he's sold to a man named Thomas More. Not as nice of a guy. 1825, Nat Turner has a vision. Like he has a dream. Maybe it's a daydream, maybe it's a night dream, I don't know. But this is what he says. This is kind of creepy. While laboring in the field, I discovered drops of blood on the corn, as though it were dew from heaven. And I communicated it to many, I told lots of people, both white and black in the area. And then I found on the leaves in the woods hieroglyphic characters and numbers, with the forms of men in different attitudes portrayed in blood and representing the figures I had seen before in the heavens. Ooh, this guy's weird. If I came to you and said, hey guys, I had these dreams last night about blood on the corn and people dying and lots of hieroglyphics, what do you do? Right, you go talk to Mr. Schwartz at lunch and say, you might want to keep an eye on Mr. Bellamy because he's talking about some weird stuff right now. I don't know if I want to be in his class because I think he might go off on us. So this Nat Turner's weird. That's 1825, but he's a patient man. He doesn't act on it. 1828, he has another vision. He says, I heard a loud noise in the heavens, And the Spirit instantly appeared to me, and said, the serpent was loosened. What's a serpent? Snake. And Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne for the sins of men, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent. What do you think the serpent represents in Nat Turner? Slavery. Slave owner, slavery, yes, enslavement. Very good, Christian. For the time was fast approaching when the first would be last, and the last should be first. What does that mean? Who is in charge? The slave owners. So if he says the last should be first and the first should be last, what does that mean? That the slaves are going to overtake the plantations. Flip it. That the students should give orders to the teachers. Ha ha, good luck. Not doing it. And by the signs in the heaven that would be made known to me when I should commence this great work, and until the first sign appeared, I should conceal it from the knowledge of men. So I'm not going to tell anyone about my creepy visions until the first sign. And on the appearance of the second sign, I should rise and prepare myself and slay my enemies with their own weapons. By 1830, so 2 years later, he moved in with a new master, Joseph Travis. Joseph Travis was a kind and gentle master. He took really good care of his slaves. As far as a man who owns people, Joseph Travis was about as good as they get. So Nat Turner is in a good situation. But by 1831, February of 1831, there's a solar eclipse, the first sign. That's weird. Any creepy stuff that happens that really isn't explainable back then is a sign. By August of 1831, the sun appeared bluish green, another sign. So Turner took 6 men and marched toward the Travis house and slaughtered the whole family. Marched across the countryside with a group growing to over 40 men, some on horseback, killing at least 55 whites by clubbing and stabbing them to death. So, slave rebellion successful? Yeah, no. Yeah, it seems to be, but by November 5th, he's captured, and he confessed to a physician, a doctor, that he was responsible for this, and he told the doctor the stories, and anybody that tells these stories, this is what's coming out of my head, you're automatically thinking loony bin, right? By November 11th, I don't understand this. Nat Turner is hanged and skinned. You'd think hanging is enough, right? You've taken his life, but they skin him too. And I think the only explanation for the skinning that I can give is they must have been trying to send a sign to other people that might be thinking about insurrection or rebellion. Don't do it, because you're going to get dead and skinned. Now, I guess once you're dead, do you really care if you're skinned? Yeah, I don't know, maybe. You know, if I die and you skin me, I'm going to haunt you forever. And it's going to be even creepier in your dreams when you have a skinless Mr. Bellamy haunting you than a Mr. Bellamy with skin haunting you. Right? You'd be like, oh my gosh, look at... Yeah. So don't skin me if I die. Just leave my skin on me. Don't scalp me. Leave my hair alone. What? I got lots of hair. Come on. 200 plus blacks in the area are killed by whites. So Nat Turner's rebellion is not successful. Most slave uprisings end in failure, just like Nat Turner's. Because they just don't have the power. The whites have the guns. The whites are empowered to keep slaves as slaves. If anything, we see in the story, poor Joseph Travis, who was tried to be a good man, I guess, by most accounts, by all accounts I've ever read, he pays the ultimate price for being a nice guy. Had he been a tougher slave master, maybe Nat Turner doesn't have the opportunity to march into his house and slaughter him and his family. This is slave insurrections, so we can divide the North and the South. Free states are tan, and slave states are sort of like Texas orange here. So when you look at slave insurrections, that means rebellions. from 1526, so colonial times, up to 1864. 1864 is the toward the end of the American Civil War. Look in the North states. In New York, there are 5 slave rebellions. In Pennsylvania, there are 4. In New Jersey, there are 4. In Connecticut, there are 4. 2 in Michigan. 11 in Kentucky. 84 in Virginia. 17, 42, 18. 16 in Texas. 42 in Louisiana. Why do the burnt orange states have so many more slave insurrections or slave rebellions than the tan states? Right. We call these states up here free states, but until 1860, they're not really free states. You could still own slaves in most northern states. Some northern states disallowed slavery. It wasn't allowed. But in most, you could own slaves. There just usually wasn't a need to. The only people really in northern states that owned slaves were usually super wealthy people and mostly house slaves. And can you see that there would be a difference between being a house slave and being a field slave? House slave, you're a butler or a cleaning lady. Do you have a horrible life? I don't mean to misrepresent slavery as being okay when I say that, but there's a big difference between being whipped and beaten and forced to work 16 hours a day and working in a mansion as a butler. Right? You wear nice clothes, you eat the same food the master eats. So that doesn't mean it's okay to own a human, but that's why we don't see it in the North. It just doesn't exist. But in the South, they exist. Almost all of them don't work out very well. So a total of 313 documented slave insurrections, just like the one we just talked about with Nat Turner. Not all as successful. Some of them would have been ended almost instantly, and some of them lasted for a little while. Are you tie-tie today, McKenna? Why? But now after school you have nothing. What was going on this morning with all the girls in the fancy dresses standing outside? Oh, scuffing them up? Okay. I'm like, why are you outside wearing dresses? I was confusable by that.
Yeah, you didn't say hi back.
I waved at you guys.
Yeah, but you didn't say hi.
Oh, I didn't know I had to talk. I thought this was close enough. It's kind of the same thing.
I didn't see that.
Sorry. I was confused. I thought maybe Mr. Hayes locked you out or something.
Oh, he did. He locked us out.
Nice. I would too. Okay. What's the difference, does anybody know, between nationalism and sectionalism?
Sectionalism is loyalty to your region, and nationalism is feeling of loyalty.
Okay, so can you give me a real life description of nationalism versus sectionalism? Like an example of today?
Nationalism is American system.
Give me an example.
Like, south of Blair versus all of Nebraska, and we're all the United States.
Okay, so Blair would be a section of Nebraska. So when the Blair Bears go play basketball, go Blair Bears, right? Because we're Blair Bear fans. But when America plays in the Olympics February? I think in China in the Olympics? I don't know. Coming up pretty soon. It's USA, USA. So we forget about our regional or our sectional differences when the Olympics are on. When the Olympics are on and there's an American, it's Winter Olympics, an American skier that's not from Blair or not from Nebraska, do you care where they're from as long as you know they're American? No, you cheer for them. I love the Olympics. I get addicted to watching them on TV, and sometimes I even stay up too late watching stuff. And by the way, it's really frustrating too because of the time difference always, because it's always over before we see it on TV, and the news reports, oh, America won a gold in skiing, and I'm like, no, I was gonna watch that tonight. But anyway, when those Olympics come on, I don't care where they're from in America, but USA, that's nationalism. It's a feeling of loyalty to our country. Or we go to war, even if we don't understand the purpose of the war, if American soldiers or sailors are off fighting a war for us, we got their back because they're us serving their country. It's America. We don't have to understand the war, but we do support our fighting men and women. They're just taking orders and doing what they're supposed to. So in the American system, we have tariffs to protect American businesses. So let's say China builds an automobile. Let's say the Chinese build a really cool pickup truck. Yeah, right. Nobody can beat Ford and Chevrolet, right? Or Dodge. I don't care what you're a fan of, but pickup trucks are cool. Can we just all agree on that? We live in Nebraska. That might be a sectional thing, but trucks are cool, right? So the Chinese build a truck that looks just like whatever your favorite is. I don't want to start a fight in here over Fords and Chevys, but I drive a Chevrolet. I like Chevrolets. I don't dislike Fords or Dodges, but I like Chevrolets. So China builds a truck that looks exactly like my Chevy pickup, but because they can build stuff cheaper, it's half the cost. If that happens, and we have the Chinolet instead of the Chevrolet, I don't know what we would call it, and it's half price, what happens to Chevrolet, an American company, as a result of the Chinese truck being half the cost? Even if the quality isn't quite as good as Chevrolet, which one are you buying? Probably buying the Chinolet. That sounds more like a potato chip. Doesn't sound like a truck. But you're going to buy the half price. So what we can do to protect Chevrolet and Ford and Dodge, because we want American businesses to be able to prosper, because American businesses hire American workers. And if American workers have jobs, they're paying bills and they're buying stuff, and it boosts our economy. We want Americans working. So what our government could do if Chinolet produces a truck that's half price is we could put a tariff on all Chinese products, or even just on Chinolet pickup trucks, and say, we're going to charge a $35,000 tax on Chinolets. Then when they come into the country, the Chinolet costs $70,000 and a brand new Chevrolet costs $70,000. Which one are you going to buy? Knowing the quality of that Chevrolet compared to the Chinolet, we're all going to buy American. Yeah, Chevy. Probably 15 years ago, I went to Nebraska Furniture Mart to buy a television. And I asked the salesman, I said, okay, I'm looking at all these. They all look the same. Some of them have a little better picture than others. But you pick out 2 or 3 that you really like, and then you look at the price tag. I asked the salesman, I said, which one of these televisions is made in America? And unfortunately, none of them were made in America. And I was really disappointed about that. Like, come on. I'll buy American if I'm given the choice, as long as the price is close. 2 years ago, we had to buy a new washer. Our washing machine died. I said, which one of these is made in America? And fortunately, I can't remember what the brand is, but one, I think it's Whirlpool, is manufactured in Iowa. And I'm like, is there a price difference? He's like, nope. In fact, the warranty is even the same. So if you're given the opportunity to buy an American product, that means that there's a factory in Iowa producing Whirlpools, or whatever brand it is, that's hiring Americans to work in their factory, and those Americans are paying taxes and buying stuff. That's good, rather than sending our money overseas. It doesn't mean you should feel guilty for it, but a tariff raises the price on overseas products to make them more expensive, to make American businesses more competitive. President Trump did that to the Chinese as a weapon. If you're not cooperating with us, if you're doing things we don't want you to do, we'll just smack a 50% tariff on all of your goods. It hurts your economy. If your economy is suffering because Americans stop buying your stuff, because we are the biggest buyer of stuff in the world, then you have to start listening to what America asks you to do. Tariffs can be very effective. We also begin the process of switching to a single currency, but we're a little bit ways away from that. Up to this point, currencies mean money. Up to this point, communities had their own currencies. In fact, within communities, banks might have their own currencies. So imagine the silliness of having Blair bucks. If I work in Blair, so if I get paid in Blair bucks, That's fine as long as all the business I do is in Blair. But if I want to go to Fremont or Omaha or Kansas City, how much are my Blair bucks worth in those places? Nothing. So converting over to a single currency eventually is going to become necessary, especially as we develop railroads that allow us to move across the country and later on airplanes so that we can fly anywhere in the country within a matter of hours. We need a currency from Nebraska, Blair, Nebraska, that also works in South Carolina or California. And the dollars in my wallet are the same here as they are everywhere else. So switching to a single currency, improving transportation. Sectionalism is loyalty to your region. Go Blair Bears. Go Big Red. Right? Some of you are like, nah. Okay, you can have your own loyalties, but your loyalty is to a region. If you're I've one of my best friends in high school. He loves Oklahoma. He always has since he was a little kid. He's an Oklahoma fan. So his loyalty is to a different region than the one that he lives in. He lives in Omaha, but he's a fan of Oklahoma. Some of you are like that too. We do that a little bit with our pro teams because Nebraska doesn't have any. We spread our loyalties over the country. My loyalty, I guess, because I'm not a huge fan of pro football or pro baseball. I like them, but I'm not a huge fan. I like the Chiefs and the Royals. Why? Because they're like the closest thing to Nebraska that we have. Or some of you like the Vikings because Minnesota's not very far away. But some of you maybe like the 49ers, and they're way the heck away from us. So those are just different loyalties. My loyalties are kind of sectional. Since we don't have the Omaha Royals or the we used to, or the Omaha Chiefs, Storm Chasers, but they're not quite the same. They're minor league. Since we don't have a real pro team, a lot of us go with the one closest to us. One, it's convenient. If I want to go to a game in Kansas City, it's like 2.5 hours away. It's easy. If I want to go to a game in Cleveland and watch the Browns, that's a long ways away. So it's easier. Sectionalism, loyalty to my region. Plus, on top of that, we're more comfortable with people in our region because we know what each other are feeling and thinking, and we speak the same. If you go into the South, they speak English, but it's a different kind of English, right? Most of us have similar political ideologies. Most of us have similar friendships. We're more alike than we are different because of the section we live in. Whether that's Blair or whether that's Nebraska, we kind of have some things in common. How am I doing on time? I don't. 9 minutes? Okay, let's do this really quick. We got an issue. Reminder. Let's see how many people know this. So don't blurt out an answer. Raise your hand if you know the answer. What is the magical number of population required for a territory to ask for statehood? Raise your hand if you remember. How many people have to live in a territory before it can become a state? Raise your hands, raise your hands. I got 1, 2. How many people have to live in a territory before it can become a state? Look at that. Row 1 plus Christian, 5, 6, 7. More than half. The fancy number is? Very good. I think I heard 60,000 from most of you. So Missouri hits 60,000. The problem is Missouri is a slave state. And at this point in history, there are the same number of slave states and free states. So when Missouri says, okay, we want to become a state, Congress says no. Because if we add a slave state, it will upset the balance of power between the free and slave states, which makes it easier for slave states to pass laws in their favor. So if Missouri is going to get admitted as a slave state, we've got to do a compromise. We're going to make a state out of another state. Maine, I believe at this point, was part of Massachusetts. So they're like, what if we just add Maine as a state? And Maine's as far north as it gets. So there are very many slaves in Maine? No, probably none. So we'll add Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. It keeps the balance of power and makes everyone happy. Then, and I'll pull down a map and show you this next class period because I don't want to run short on time. They say, as part of the compromise, We're not going to add any new slave states north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude. So that's the compromise that they come up with. We'll add a slave and a free, keeps the balance of power in Congress, and really it only matters in the Senate, because in the Senate everybody gets 2 senators. So neither side can outvote the other side. And no new slave states north of this line right here. So Missouri is the furthest north of the slave states that we're going to add, at least since the beginning. The red are slave states, green are free states, and then the blue is unorganized territory, so like Nebraska. Nobody's really out here at the time of the Missouri Compromise in 1821. This is 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude. So once we get this territory out here, and this line spreads across this way, lines of latitude run parallel to each other. Once we put that line out there, when Nebraska territory is ready to become a state, according to the Missouri Compromise, is it an issue? What is Nebraska, free or slave, according to the Missouri Compromise? It's free. What about Kansas? Free. What about Minnesota? Free. Montana? Free. South Dakota? Free. How about Texas? Could be slave because it's not north of this line. So they're trying to draw a political boundary, a physical political boundary that says no new slave state north of this line, which most likely not very many anyway. And even in Missouri, that is a slave state, most Missourians are not slave owners. But it's legal to own slaves in the state of Missouri. So free states are red, slave states are red, free states are green. Open to slavery by the Missouri Compromise would be Arkansas Territory when it's ready to become a state. And then the blue, no slavery, according to the Missouri Compromise. That will be tested later. But compromises are intended to keep both sides at least a little bit happy. You know, the example I used earlier when we talked about compromise, if you want to stay out till 11 and your mom wants you in by 9, maybe you get lucky and end up at 10. And I talked to you before about always ask for more than you expect to get because you're going to have to give something up. My kids know that. Taryn asks all the time, can I stay out until blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, no. You can stay out till blah, blah, blah. And then we usually end up somewhere in the middle because she's pretty persuasive and she's a pretty good kid most of the time. But you also run the favor of having angry parents that are upset with you anyway, and you say 11 and they say 9, and then you say, how about 10? And they're like 8.
Yeah.
You have to catch them at the right time and in the right mood. It's always a good idea to clean your room before you go ask. Just saying. From experience as both a kid and a parent, I'm telling you, clean your room before you go ask for anything. Or make breakfast for mom. I don't know, maybe they don't like that. Yeah, Christian's not allowed to touch the stove.
I am allowed.
No, I don't
touched it
think so.
many times.
I don't think you are, buddy.
I am.
I think it's a bad
I've never
idea.
cut anything.
You lit the whole